My name is Matthew Verschuur. I run the website www.bibleprotector.com. I want to do a review and answer the accusations brought up by Gary Hudson in his tract, KJB Revision is No Myth. Of course, we know that there has been revision of the King James Bible, and that kind of revision is what we would call editorial alterations. Those editorial alterations are very different to changing the underlying text and translation of the King James Bible. See, editors had to correct printing errors that have taken place in editions of the King James Bible. That's entirely proper. Copy editing itself has taken place virtually, and we would have to say all the time, in many editions starting from 1611 itself. Again, there have been changes in the way that words are spelt, and the grammar has been standardized since 1611. For example, around the 1750s especially, there's been standardization of the language. Also, the editorial view would take into account regularization, and that's how you can see that sometimes consistency in where a word is used, or also things like how italics are used, things like that, all come under this banner. King James Version revision is no myth. Big deal, that's a fact. But then he asks a question, and I think that he's being not entirely honest in the way he's asking the question. He asks colourfully, is the KJV used today a 1611 AV? Now the implication is that the King James Bible has changed, or that there is a different King James Version today to what was used in 1611. Well, all of that is incorrect. We're using the same text and translation as what was there in 1611. Even Dr. James White knows there's been no significant alterations, no significant changes. We are actually using the same Bible version, and the kinds of alterations or changes you can find within the printed history of the King James Bible are merely editorial differences in regards to, as I said, correcting of printing errors, the standardization of the language, that include spelling and grammar, and of course other editorial regularization, which also comes into areas like, for example, things to do with format and italics as well. So that's the kind of case that we can make for revision. Revision does not mean changing the translation and the version. It merely means proper editorial work that should have been done, and it was. Now, Hudson has this view that more than 400 errors in the first edition of the King James Bible were corrected in a subsequent edition 2 years later. Those 400 errors were printing errors of the printers. In other words, this has nothing to do with, the King James Bible itself has errors in it. You see, the way he's presenting the information, always by telling half the story, it seems to make a bad case, where as in effect, in reality, it's not. The first edition already had corrections made to it in the second edition of 1611, not 2 years later, not 1613, but 1611. And so, sources for that include Scrivener's book. Now, the interesting thing here is Hudson writing this article clearly didn't know all the facts. He had the information about Scrivener's book, and yet amazingly missed that there was a whole appendix of differences between just the first 1611 editions, and there's two different ones, the He Bible and the She Bible. And then of course now we have all kinds of resources, including David Norton's book on the subject. Rick Norris has been doing ongoing investigation into various editions of the King James Bible and showing how many differences there are in so many different editions. And on the Bible Protector website, that's my website, you can find out about some of the changes. I've talked quite extensively about how there's been a development from 1611 to the pure Cambridge edition, which we have today, which is the correct standard Cambridge derived edition. And of course, we know that people always have held the Cambridge to be the best. So that's the standard, and we can show that very clearly. Now, he gives one example. This is going to be the big example. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28. Now, again, dishonest handling of facts. He says AV KJV, like this is the authorized King James Version that was in 1611, as if somehow the spelling and the printer's mistakes of 1611 are somehow sanctified and holy. I mean, that's the ridiculous argument that someone might be trying to concoct. But in reality, that so-called AV KJV 1611, I mean, that's just tautology. It's not saying somehow it's the authorized version of 1611. What's the authorized version today? He then lists current KJV. So in 1611 it said helps in governments, and today it says current KJV 1850. Well, our KJV, our current edition, is not 1850. He wasn't writing this. Hudson wasn't writing this in 1850. Scrivener wasn't doing this in 1850. 1850 is a whimsical date. There is no known revision of any value, of any worth, of any significance, or of any effect that somehow in 1850 should be a date that is listed. It's just imprecise, incorrect, and wrong, because our current KJV dates to the 20th century. Because whether it's the Oxford edition, which is held to be common by people, which definitely dates into the 20th century, or it is the Cambridge edition, which also dates into the 20th century, that we're using as a standard. And even editions like the Concord edition and so on, they're all 20th century editions. So to say 1850 is just an incorrect thing. And now it says helps, governments. Well, did that change happen only recently? No, that change happened very, very long ago in early editions of the King James Bible. This is not a big deal. This is not some kind of, it's not a conspiracy, it's not some kind of strange occurrence. Printing errors and the kind of mistakes that took place because they were using the Bishop's Bible as a basis for their editing and translating. That's the King James Bible translators between 1604 and 1611. They were using the Bishop's Bible, so maybe sometimes something from the Bishop's Bible, some mistaken rendering came through, because as the printer's trying to follow the emendations and the annotations, he could be confused. It's very obvious that could be a likely scenario, besides other kinds of printing errors that took place. And so that all explains very much why there would be word differences and the need for corrections to that first 1611 printing, because clearly the intention, the right text and translation was there, but the English presentation of it needed the work to adjust, that is to say, to bring it to the precision, and it took a long time to get it there to what we have today. Now he then tries to argue that the King James Bible onlyist must somehow hold to absolute infallibility down to the very words, as if a printer cannot make a mistake, or if a printer makes a mistake, somehow that's written off the entire Word of God. Well, it's just a ludicrous argument. He talks about it is common to hear some argue that the KJV has not undergone any significant revision or change since 1611. Well, when you analyse, are these textual alterations, are these translation alterations, or are they merely editorial, copy editing and that kind of thing? Is it merely the normal kind of thing, what we would expect, correcting printing errors, standardising the spelling and things like that? Then of course we could say they're not significant. It's just wrong to imply that they are significant in that kind of comparison. We'll go down to what Scrivener said. Now he calls him Dr. Scrivener, but Scrivener is called a Mister in other authentic historical documents. So he calls Scrivener a authoritative source. Well, we have to be clear about that. Scrivener certainly did correct collation of information, but to interpret the information and to realise Scrivener was actually writing a book to advertise his own edited edition of the King James Bible. So it's not unbiased. Now, the other problems are that Scrivener confused which edition came first in 1611, and someone like W. Aldous Wright, who was a renowned scholar, he refuted Scrivener's view there. So to somehow uphold that Scrivener's information is going to be authoritative, you have to understand it properly to know where he's coming from. And Hudson quotes from Scrivener. It says, "Most readers will be aware that numberless and not inconsiderable departures from..." Now notice that word departures means there must have been a standard and you went away from it. We'll see why that's wrong. "Departures from the original or standard edition of the authorized translation as published in 1611 are to be found in the modern Bibles which issue from the press by thousands every year." So what Hudson is doing by quoting Scrivener, and Scrivener was wrong in doing this, was upholding that the 1611 first one published was somehow the correct authoritative standard, when in fact we know just from analysing editions, from the view of editions of many people through time, you can see that the 1611 edition in fact is the most unauthoritative as far as lots of printing mistakes and need for editorial work. So what Scrivener is saying really is not precise, and what Hudson is using this to argue is completely a wrong argument. He says some of these differences must be imputed to oversight and negligence, as implying that the whole history of the King James Bible is merely human and it's just all random and haphazard. And of course there is that element of that. He says, "from which no work of man can be entirely free." Well, that's just saying right there we can't get perfection in editing. Why did Scrivener even try and edit if you can't get perfection in editing? Of course we know we can get perfection in editing, but it's going to be by the believing process. "But much the greater part of them are deliberate changes, introduced silently and without authority by men whose very names are often unknown." Well, since when do we have to know who the people are if it comes through the right tradition? Because it is the right tradition that is accepted by the Christians that shows where the authority is at. I mean, we didn't know personally the people who wrote the Bible to start with. That doesn't diminish anything about the truth of the Bible. We don't know exactly who penned every last part of the Bible in the original inspiration. That's not an issue. Who wrote all of the book of 2 Kings or whatever. It's almost irrelevant. The reality is God is in control. And the same argument therefore can be applied to how the canon was formed, how translation was correctly done into English with the King James Bible in 1611, and how the editing has occurred since 1611 to get to the precise and correct standard of presentation as we have today. And to undermine that, which is what Scrivener does, he does it for 2 reasons. One, he wants to bolster his own edition, which is actually a prideful position to be in, but also he is, therefore by implication, against the 1769 tradition. He's against the kind of changes or the kind of things that we have in our normal Bibles that are all used today. So he's against that because he wanted to change that. He wanted to go back to 1611, or he wanted to make changes himself and changing spelling or things like that on his own accord. And Scrivener's book is full of him talking about the kind of changes he made as well. And not only has Scrivener done that, but others have done it too, including David Norton. Well, we don't accept that. So Scrivener, according to Hudson, did a masterful collation. Well, we'll spare us the editorial insights, editorializing by Hudson here. Such changes, he puts that in bold, changes in the KJB occurring from the revisions of 1613, etc. He lists some dates. 1744, probably more likely understood now to be the 1743 edition, which was done by someone called F.S. Paris. That's P-A-R-R-I-S. And we account that there have been specifically 7 important editorial milestones in the King James Bible's history. And the first one is the first 1611 that was printed, and there's a reason why that's counted as the first, because it actually sits as the improvement on the previous existence of Bibles in English. And so that's important to understand as well. He says, Hudson says, also Dr. Benjamin Blaney, whose 1769 edition best represents the current KJV, well, that's fairly imprecise. the editions that are in use today, or let's say 20th century editions, they're based on Blayney's work. That's true. But you don't go to Blayney to find the representative of today. What you do is you look today and see the roots of it are in Blayney. So Hudson is not a scholar here. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not aware of the editorial history of the King James Bible, other than having a cursory read of Scrivener. That's probably the level of knowledge he had in writing this tract, which you can't really call a tract anyway. It's more a diatribe against the perfection of the King James Bible. Tracts, at least, would be presenting scriptural arguments, and we don't find them here. He then quotes from Blayney, many errors, well, they're printing errors, not text and translation errors as such. A printing error can appear to be a text and translation error, but actually it's a printing error, and if you correct the printing error, you're going to make sure that the text and translation, which was intended and there all along, be what we might use the word reformed, or be made manifest that that's actually what was being meant at that place. That was the intention. Errors that were found in former editions have been corrected. So what was Blayney using? If you read Blayney's own words on the subject, you'll find Blayney was looking at former editions. So that's what he is comparing to. Been corrected, and the text reformed to such a standard of purity, so he calls good editing toward purity, as it is presumed is not to be met with in any other edition hitherto extant. In other words, the 1769 edition was the best to that time. Well, since that time there's been improvement, but you cannot go on forever and ever in the future and just say, oh, there's going to be more changes, more improvement, more editing of the King James Bible. That's impossible. Once you reach what we might call the apogee or the zenith, once you reach the furthest point, you come to the exemplar, exactly correct edition. We have it now. It's in our Pure Cambridge edition. You can't, and editing cannot make more changes to what is now accomplished and achieved. We are there as far as the editorial standard of the King James Bible. Go to the Bible Protector website, find out about that. Hudson writes, most importantly, however, is a key reason for many of Blayney's 1769 corrections, when he says frequent recourse has been made to the Hebrew and Greek originals. This is imprecise and incorrect, and actually borders on a lie, because Hudson does not know this for a fact. How can he say that there was the key reason for changes that Blayney made was that somehow Blayney was consulting Hebrew and Greek to make changes in his edition in 1769? It's a lie. It's incorrect, because first of all, Blayney, in talking about making frequent recourse to the Hebrew and Greek originals, was in regards to whether or not to italicize a word. Secondly, in editorial decisions, Blayney, it was regarding other editions of the King James Bible, and does not imply in that sense that he was looking at the Hebrew and Greek original, let's say Stephanus's Greek or whatever. So it is incorrect for Hudson to somehow imply that the reason why Blayney made all these changes was because he was looking at the Hebrew and Greek. It's incorrect, and it's wrong. And it's wrong if you view it historically. It's wrong if you look at Blayney's own words. Of course, what he wants to really imply, and this is the whole of Hudson's agenda here, is he wants to say we've got a different Bible today than what was there in 1611. I mean, that's what he would love there to be, because he has this a priori assumption and this starting point that the King James Bible is not perfect, and he wants to undermine the confidence that we have in it. That's actually his agenda in writing this. I mean, otherwise, why did he even write the tract? Why did he even bother to refute the King James Bible only view, unless it was to undermine the power and the correctness of the King James Bible, which is obviously what he's doing. He writes, it will be shown below in the following list of changes taken from Scrivener's book, some of which were made on the basis of the Hebrew and Greek originals. Okay, that's incorrect. It's a lie. He's inserting this idea where such an idea does not exist. Unless he's talking about italics or perhaps marginal notes, we can agree there, and the facts will support that. Yes, Blayney definitely did look at Hebrew and Greek, but to say all these changes that Blayney made on the basis of Hebrew and Greek, that's a stretch to start with. But when you look at what actually occurred at the end, you can see all the changes that Blayney made are actually in line with proper English use, and that's really where you can see Blayney went. And now Blayney didn't get 100% right, but Blayney did very far in getting it correct. And since Blayney's time, we've had a little bit more editing taking place, even in Oxford editions, you'll notice it. And then we see in the Cambridge tradition the best possible coming, and that was the standard that we now hold, and we uphold it, the pure Cambridge edition of the King James Bible. So Hudson argues that there were indeed deliberate alterations in the KJV revisions affecting the sense of many passages. Revision is no myth at all. Again, the sense is not actually affected, not when you understand it properly. If a printer made a mistake in 1611, it's not altering the sense to correct that mistake. It's actually making sure that what was originally supposed to be communicated there or intended there was and is now perceived to be communicated, because you have to get rid of the printing error, which may, if you took the printing error literally, may affect your perception of the sense, but is not actually changing the sense of any passage, because the King James Bible text and translation has not been altered since or in 1611. It's been the same down the line. He writes, since 1613, proof of actual word changes in the KJV revisions affecting the sense of many passages, and he gives this whole list, which I won't go through, but many of them are merely printing mistakes from 1611, and they were corrected mainly in early years, 1613, maybe years like 1616, certainly in 1629, a lot of changes by 1629 and in 1638. Now there's some kind of differences or changes that occurred that are not in line with that they could be classified as printing errors, because in textual criticism you can see, the printers, in making a copying error, they missed out this word because of the common ending of the two words, or skipping words and things like that. They're the kind of things that you can find, the errors that the printers definitely did make. When you look at an example like Matthew chapter 12 and verse 23, it asks the question, is this the son of David in 1611? That was not early corrected, that was corrected down the line to, is not this the son of David? And the reason for that change is actually to do with the standardization of English. It's not changing the meaning. What it is changing is how we express more precisely in the 1750s especially, after that time, how we express in our English standardized grammar the question which was being asked all along. So it's merely to do with precision and editorial exactness, and it's not a change in the sense, it's not a change in the underlying text or translation of the King James Bible. Another kind of example is Matthew chapter 14 verse 9, where it says there in 1611, oaths. There was no apostrophes then. Now we have an apostrophe oath, apostrophe s. Why is this listed? It's listed because Scrivener had an agenda to undermine the actual translation of the King James Bible, because he was implying, the apostrophe is in the wrong place, because the word should be oaths plural, and then turn that into possessive. So Herod, talking to Salome, didn't just make one oath. Well, the scripture shows he made one oath. So this wrong interpretation, and then you can go further, because of course Scrivener even made changes in the translation, but we won't talk about that. Why is Hudson pointing at these things? And then he points to the Cambridge King James Version editions and Oxford King James Version editions. Jeremiah chapter 34 verse 16, a classic example. Cambridge says whom ye, Oxford whom he. Well, they could ask the question, which is right? Which one's the right one? Well, the very much in favour is the Cambridge edition. People like Dr. James White favours it. All the way through King James Bible only people favour the Cambridge edition. That is considered to be the best, and we can show through the analysis of the Cambridge edition as compared to the Oxford how it is precise and correct at every one of these differences, and there's many more than what Hudson lists here. So he says, with the above evidence. Now evidence implies, or we should say, we have to be more precise here, the above data should not be misinterpreted. See, evidence is like having a story and making the data match your story. And of course, that in itself is scientific and proper. But when you have wrong interpretations, as Hudson clearly has, then he's going to mangle the data to match his view rather than what it actually is showing. So he asks this question for the KJV onlyites, which is a slur. Since the revisions, so he's trying to imply the King James Bible is somehow different, changed, of the King James Version from 1613, or we would say more precisely from 1611, to 1850. Now, why is 1850 listed? Let's reject that year date from somehow being the end or close or whatever. So we'll say from 1611 to the present time made. So there have been revisions made even in recent times. Not that we accept those new revisions. We don't accept new changes to the King James Bible that have been made like by David Norton or someone like that. And he writes, in addition to changes in punctuation, capitalization and spelling, many hundreds of changes in words, word order, possessive, singulars, for plurals, articles, pronouns, conjunctions, prepositions, entire phrases, and the addition and deletion of words. Would you say the KJV was verbally inerrant in 1611 or 1613, 1629, 1638, 1644, 1664? Well, let's stop right there. What revision took place in 1644? I mean, to argue and say, oh, the King James Version was verbally inerrant, I mean, printers made mistakes. Are we trying to say that somehow printers were inspired so that they shouldn't make a mistake? It's just, that's a ludicrous straw man argument. Hudson is not being honest in the way he's asking this. If he's going to ask, well, which edition do you hold to that should be, let's say, precise and accurately presenting the King James Bible, because we know the text and translation didn't change, why is he asking about a revision that took place in 1644 when no known revision took place in 1644? Why is he asking about a revision that took place in 1664 when no known revision took place in 1664? He hasn't got the facts straight to start with. And he says 1701, 1744, or probably more precisely 1743, 1762, 1769, or 1850. Again, what revision would we accept from 1850? There is no revision that we accept from 1850. We don't know of an Oxford edition revision taking place in 1850, or a Cambridge revision taking place in 1850, or from the London printers, which would have been Eyre and Strahan, or Eyre and Spottiswoode, those printers in 1850. We don't accept that. There's none. There's just normal editions being printed in our normal tradition of King James Bible editions. And of course, 1850 was not the end. I mean, 1850 is nothing. We talk about there's a 20th century pure Cambridge edition, and of course there was an Oxford edition through very minor kind of copy editing. 1817, Doyley and Mant, they edited in those years, in around, so you look at 1817 and that sort of period of time. Going forward from there, you see very tiny variations in the Oxford. A word like soap, S-O-P-E, changed spelling to S-O-A-P, something like that. Very minor types of things taking place. Maybe the word Lord went from lowercase to small capitals, or the other way in a few instances. These are the kind of things you'll find in the 1800s. And then, of course, there's various small changes in how you spell a word, depending on which company you look at, or just to do with what editor was working that time on the book. So whether or not axe is spelled A-X-E or just A-X, and there's various other, do you hyphenate word? Do you put two words together? You can have almond tree, and all these kind of things like axle tree, and all these different words, and even, so different fruit trees. Are those one word? Is it two words? Is it hyphenated? These are the kind of variations you're going to find. So the whole point here is that the King James Bible is correct in our pure Cambridge edition, and we are standing for it, and we can refute and reject Gary Hudson's implications that somehow it's it's lost or chaotic or we don't know. We clearly do know we have a correct edition. Come to the Bible Project website and you can find out all about it there.